Hello there, my little ghosts, and welcome back to another spooky story. Please make sure you claim your tombstone in a graveyard by subscribing to the channel, and if you enjoy my stories, don't forget to leave a like and maybe a comment. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok, they will be linked down below. And you can also check out my tarot channel, where I do different readings on various topics for you. It will be also linked in the description below. And without further ado, let's begin tonight's story. You who enter here, seeking the dead and the unseen, shall never escape their lifeless embrace. Let these words flood your mind as you take your next step. Where I'm from, ghost stories are as common as can be. From the day we are born to the day we leave this world. Our stories, however, are not a figment of one's imagination. They are documented in the archives of the Church and even those of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Empress Maria Theresa herself has been fetched reports of encounters with the revenants on the not-so-holy land of modern-day Romania. To this day, the other side still makes vivid appearances in many parts of this country, but for now, I will only tell you about a deep, sinister forest not so far from where I live. You've likely heard of it before. It baffles the scientific and paranormal communities alike, and most know it under the name of Hoia Baciu. People don't go there, unless of course they thirst for danger. And despite all the warnings they are given, many venture to seek evidence for themselves about the existence of a world beyond our own. I was one of the fools to enter these woods. It was raining that day when I fled from home in the middle of an argument with my mother. I was 16 and an absolute brat of a boy, reckless and quite untamable, thirsting for the forbidden and the hidden. And so for me, the only place I could fathom visiting to calm my nerves was the dreaded forest. Upon arriving at the edge of the cursed woods, I could still hear the muffled cries of my mom, who would not stop calling my name. I knew she would not find me had I entered, and so that is what I did. I started running, avoiding trees, listening to the sound of my steps on the dried leaves and old fallen branches. I did not stop until I could not hear my mother's voice anymore. I smiled between gasps for air, and I fell to the ground with a thud. Looking up at the tree crowns, I felt at peace at last. I was free to calm my nerves and think. Before long, I realized the only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat and not a thing more. I could not say I was surprised. I had heard many stories of these dreaded woods, but instead of creeping me out, they made my adrenaline-infused heart more and more eager to find its secrets, to face its monsters. And of course, it did not disappoint me one bit. I helped myself up by grasping onto a tree branch, and in so doing, I scratched my palm pretty bad. Bad enough to make me yelp. I looked at the wound crested on my hand, and then at the branch that had caused it. But it was something else altogether that caught my eye. 5 markings on the trunk of the tree, as if made by a bear claw. Just that they could not have been made by a bear. You see, a bear would not burn the bark in doing so. I looked around the tree to see if there were any other markings. That is when I caught a glimpse of a red piece of fabric down on the ground some 60 yards away from me. It disappeared behind one of the trees, so I did not get a good look at it, but I saw it nevertheless. I knew what I had seen. Curious out of my mind, I got up and I went to check. The bright red color stood out like nothing else in the dark green and gray background of the forest. But of course, as one might expect, as I got to where it had disappeared, it was nowhere to be found. I walked around some more, trying to make sense of what I had just seen, of the markings and the cloth. I had no thoughts of turning back just yet, knowing my mother would have still been madly upset with me, and somehow I feared her reprimanding more than anything in the woods. Still, my surroundings were quiet as a grave, so hearing myself breathing made me extremely self-conscious about my own body. My senses heightened to unprecedented proportions, my mind clear, curious, and inquisitive as can be. I walked around aimlessly, completely oblivious to the fact that I could get easily lost. I was sure of myself that I was not far, and I would be able to recognize my way out. Then the red came back, once more, this time lingering just a little longer, as if waiting for me to spot it. It was further away this time, but still really easy to notice. And this time too, it hid and disappeared, but came back as I looked up and around for it. It was as if it played with me, or better yet said, lured me in. I must have been doing this for around half an hour, maybe more, when eventually it stopped. I looked around so much I got dizzy when I decided I would take a break and sit down at the base of a crooked tree. I felt better at that point, and even convinced myself it was probably safe to return home. My mom would have still been pissed, sure, but more so worried that I had disappeared, and happy to have me back. Just as I wanted to get up again, I smelled something. It was potent and sweet, and really familiar. It was smoke. Burnt wood. Looking to see where it came from, as I thought someone else was lighting up a fire and could have helped me get back on the trail, I realized it was closer than I believed. More precisely, it came from behind and above me. That is when I saw it. A red hand. A bright, red, human-looking hand. Just that it ended in grotesque black claws digging into the tree bark, scratching it, burning it in doing so. I screamed, and as I did, the hand retreated behind the tree. I stepped away immediately and put distance between me and the trunk. I cautiously encircled it and found nothing. The forest got dark at that point. Storm clouds were gathering up on the sky, and soon enough, a thunder followed. I gulped. This was too close for comfort. As my eyes readjusted to the lower brightness, my body set into high alert. I needed to get away. But as I turned around, a pair of skeletal red claws sneaked from behind me slowly in an attempt to cover my face. I shrieked so loud I thought I would break my vocal cords. I ducked and sprinted away from whatever was behind me and fell to the ground a few yards away. I felt my shoulder snapping as it hit the ground. I could not feel my arm anymore. And you'd think that's enough to paralyze a man with fear, right? You'd be wrong. I was paralyzed with fear. Terror even. But not at my perfectly numb arm. I was stuck, watching the tall, red figure before me. A red, floating piece of fabric as if draped over a body, only it wasn't touching the ground. At the ends were fading into burgundy and black smoke and dissipating into thin air. And the hands were dragging on the ground as it slowly floated towards me. It had no eyes, but somehow I felt its death stare penetrating deep into my mind, reading me like an open book, a vulnerable one. I crawled away, never losing sight of this thing, but it reached with one of those bony, grotesque arms and grabbed my leg. It slowly turned around and pointed with the other hand. It pointed into the distance, deeper into the forest. I shook my head, and I tried to pull myself away from it. It did not let me go, and when I screamed again and jerked my leg, it scratched my calf, and I felt the claws burning me and the smell of burnt skin. Tears started falling down my cheeks, blurring my vision. At that point, the thing pulled away and hissed, as if I had hurt it. "Innocent," it whispered in a raspy tone, and raised its arms towards the sky. I blinked rapidly to regain my vision, and scrambled back up on my feet. The thing retreated, and once again pointed into the distance. Where it was pointing, all the trees were crooked, bending unnaturally towards the ground, and then curving back up. They encircled a portion of the woods, where the land was completely barren. Nothing ever grew there. I had heard about that spot. I just never ventured deep enough to find it. The apparition floated towards that spot, dragging its hands on the ground behind it. Foolishly enough, I felt called to follow. Despite of what had just happened to me, I followed the thing as if hypnotized into the literal heart of the forest. It stopped in the center of the barren plot of land and faced me for a few moments before pointing up to one of the trees. It is safe to say I froze. The branches of the tree that crossed the line into the barren circle looked dead and rotten. I did not know how they had the strength to carry the body, or what was left of it for that matter. Hanging there from a noose was a human corpse covered in a burial shroud, once white most likely, now covered in what I assumed could only be dried blood. Taking a closer look, I could see the markings. The trunk had been scratched. He or she scratched it, as they most likely tried to grab onto it to save themselves. The figure spoke again. Innocent. I turned back around to look at it, but it was gone. Fortunately for me, shortly after that, I heard the sound of laughter in the distance. People. Thank God. I started yelling for help to attract their attention. Soon enough, a group of about a dozen of guys found my location, and after briefly questioning what I was doing there, they offered some water and patched my leg up. One of them helped put my shoulder back into place, although in retrospect that wasn't necessarily a smart decision. Not that any of my previous actions were smart decisions, but by now you understand I am not such a bright guy. I went on to explain that, just like them, I was exploring the woods and had gotten lost. They asked about my wound and shoulder, and I told them that I took a pretty serious fall and hurt myself. I don't think they believed me, but I said I needed help getting back out of the forest, so a couple of them escorted me back onto the trail. The rest of them stayed to examine the dead circle in the middle, and I pointed out the body. I think that is what the thing wanted from me, because they retrieved the body that same day and gave it a proper burial. Now, call me a fool, but I still occasionally go for a walk in those woods. When I do, I pass the local cemetery, and there is always a red figure staring at me from behind one of the tombstones.